For more on the coalition against the Islamic State and the fight against the terrorist group, I'm joined by Sunjeev Bery. He is the Advocacy Director for the Middle East and North Africa for Amnesty International USA. Let's kind of walk through some of the members of this coalition because the U.S., the Obama administration, making a big deal of the partners there in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, for example, Human Rights Watch says the country has stepped up arrests, trials, and convictions of peaceful dissidents, forcibly disperse peaceful demonstrations. They say it's a place of unfair trials and arbitrary detention. I can go on and on about Bahrain, also not getting very high marks. How does the U.S. administration square the fact that they come down hard on Assad, Mubarak, Gaddafi, and yet align themselves with some of these other countries?
Right, and these are important questions because at the end of the day, many of the major powers in the world go soft on their own allies' terrible human rights records. So just as Russia, for example, has shielded the Assad government in Syria, the United States has gone very soft with regards to Saudi Arabia's internal human rights crisis. In Saudi Arabia, you can be beheaded for the crime of sorcery. So you can imagine situations where people get apprehended, accused of a crime, tortured until they confess, whether there's a real confession or not, and then are given the death penalty, sometimes by a swordsman cutting off their head.
Well, the democracy seems to be a big part of, that's what George W. Bush said was the big thing. He wanted it spreading across the Middle East with the invasion of Iraq. And yet these repressive regimes, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of arm twisting to try and get them to change. There is arm twisting when they need him as a part of this coalition.
Right, and the United States has sold large amounts of weapons to Saudi Arabia, for example. Bahrain is home of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, so there's a military relationship there that many are concerned prevents the United States or leads the United States to not properly or openly criticize the Bahraini government. Qatar, for example, is another country where even as Qatar's government says it's part of this coalition, there is a poet in Qatar who's serving at least a 10-year prison sentence for writing a poem critical of the ruling family.
Let's go with Qatar, because this is an interesting headline I just found from The Telegraph just a couple of days ago. The headline reads, "How Qatar is funding the rise of Islamist extremists. The fabulously wealthy Gulf state, which owns an array of London landmarks and claims to be one of our best friends in the Middle East, is a prime sponsor of violent Islamists." So this is another thing that seems rather interesting, that perhaps they're fueling this sort of thing and now coming in on the back end to try and help the U.S. coalition.
Amnesty International has consistently called on each of the governments that may or may not be supplying weapons to make sure that any recipients of weapons are carefully vetted before anybody receives anything, whether in Syria, Iraq, or elsewhere. And it seems quite clear from recent developments that that's not the case. Not only has the Syrian government been involved in crimes against humanity, but many of the armed opposition groups, not necessarily all, but many of the armed opposition groups have also been using weapons to commit war crimes as well.
What's needed in the region to bring back stability? Obviously, the United States has been involved in fighting there for more than a decade now. It doesn't seem to be any more stable. What are the answers?
The big answer is accountability, and that means that no government in the region should be shielded from the sharp glare and focus of the UN Security Council and the UN Human Rights Committee. That means that governments should stop shielding their allies in the Middle East, whether it's the U.S. government shielding Israel, for example, or going soft on the Saudi Arabian government, or other governments in the world, for example, Russia, blocking UN Security Council action that could help bring the crisis down in Syria.
Erasing a double standard.
Yeah, double standards all around. And for those who are in countries where they can influence their own governments, it's important, particularly in the United States, for people in the United States and Amnesty International USA members to push the government of the United States to not have a double standard when it comes to its allies in the region.
All right, Sunjeev, thanks so much for coming.